In the previous video, we had a brief introduction of HTTP, and we saw a basic GET request example. We also saw the different HTTP methods available that we can use to interact with web applications. In this video, we're going to take a look at the structure of a URL, the request and response headers, and an example of GET requests using Telnet, to understand how it works at a low level. I bet you have seen thousands of URLs by now. It's now time to stop and think about the URL structure. Let's see what each part means. The first part is the protocol in web applications. The two protocols used are HTTP and HTTPS. When using HTTP, the port that will be used is 80. And when using HTTPS, the port will be 443. The next part is the host we want to contact. In red, we can see the resource or the file location in that server. In this example, the directory is content and the resource is section. Then we have the question mark symbol that indicates what's to come is the query string. These are the parameters that will be passed to the section of page for processing purposes. There are some alternatives, like adding username and password for authentication before the host, or explicitly defining the port for cases where the web server is not listening in the standards 80 or 443 ports. Now, let's talk about headers. Headers are a core part of HTTP requests and responses. They describe how the client and the server talk to each other, and also provide information about the transaction. We have client-side headers which are sent by the browser. Some examples are user agent. This informs the server what type of OS, browser, plugins the users have. Accept encoding defines which encoding the browser supports, usually gzip or deflate. This will compress the content and reduce the bandwidth time for transaction. Referrer contains the referrer URL, basically from which page you clicked that link. Cookie. If our browser has cookies for a site, it will add them in the cookie header. And we also have server-side headers, which are set by the web server. Cache control defines the directives which must be obeyed by all caching mechanisms along the chain. Location is used for redirections. Whenever there is a 301 or 302 response, the server must send this header. Set cookie. It is the header used to set a cookie in the user's browser. www authenticate. This header is used by the server to request authentication. When the browser sees this header, it will open a login window asking for the user name and password. This is an example of how a response header looks like when making a GET request to www.packedpub.com. Some of them we mentioned here, like cache control, content encoding, content type. I suggest you getting familiar with all of them, and every time you find a new header, read about it to learn its function. After reviewing the URL structure and the headers, let's try a GET request on a real server. In order to do so, I will use the terminal and telnet command to send a raw GET request to the server. This is us simulating a browser by typing in the telnet connection. Let's switch to our VM and open up the terminal and type telnet www.http://bin.org 80. 80 is the port we want Telnet to connect. http://bin.org is a website that provides an HTTP request and response service, useful to test tools. Hit Enter. Once we connect, we see this message. connected to http bin.org. Escape character is chevron close square bracket. That means the connection is established. Next, let's type get /IP http /1.0 and hit enter twice. This is us telling the server that we are using get to request the resource called /IP. And then we specify the http /1.0 protocol followed by 2 enters. As a result, we get our first response from the server. Notice, we haven't used any headers at all in the request, but we received many headers from the server, plus the content of the resource IP. In this case, the content is the IP address of the machine making the request. Now, let's do another example, but this time requesting a URL that has a parameter. Telnet http bin.org 80. Get /redirect -to URL equals http://www.bing.com http /1.0. Again, we used get, but this time we request the resource redirect to with the parameter URL in the query string with the value http://www.bing.com. In this case, the server basically redirects the browser to the URL provided, using the location header and returning a 302 redirection code. Here is the return code. And here is the location header. In this case, nothing happens, as Telnet doesn't interpret that header. Remember, this is a raw connection. In this video, we learned about the URL structure, the request and response headers, and performed some hands-on examples on how to perform a GET request using Telnet and raw HTTP commands. In the next video, we're going to start communicating with web apps using Python and the requests library.